Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the Pride Not Cruelty Report discussion live stream. Today we're going to be speaking about legal activities fueling the illegal international bone trade. My name is Fari Sanika. I'm a travel content creator under the alias GoFari, and today we are joined by Dr. Neil de Cruz, who's the head of animal welfare and research at World Animal Protection and an international wildlife expert with over 20 years of experience. He recently wrote the report that we will be discussing today. We also have Dr. Louise de Waal, who's the director and campaign manager of Blood Lions, a South African NPO that campaigns to end the unethical commercial captive lion and other predator breeding industry in South Africa. So let's get right into it. And I'd love to get Dr. Neil de Cruz up first. And I would like to ask, last week you released a report on World Lion Day that has been widely covered in South African and international media, where you uncovered fresh evidence linking legal and illegal activities in the commercial captive lion industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about the report and its local and global significance?
Hi, Fari. Yes, thanks for the introduction there. Yes, that's right. World Animal Protection has released a new report on the commercial captive lion industry in South Africa. As you said, I'm a wildlife researcher who has been focused on various aspects of lion farming in South Africa, ranging across its potential impacts on things like animal welfare, public health, and conservation. Also, how it's been regulated from a kind of a provincial, national, and international perspective, and also what might be influencing consumer demand. So, what is driving demand for exploitation of lions, and what might change people's minds about seeing them as purely as products. And this particular report, it really is focused on the nexus, as you said, between legal and illegal activities taking place in the industry, and really specifically it highlights how some legal activities like captive breeding, canned hunting, are being used to fuel and potentially cover involvement in the illegal international big cat bone trade, because the bones are sought for traditional Asian medicine in particular. So this report is new, fresh evidence, but it's adding weight to existing concerns about this link that are already out there.
Thank you. I think that is a really, really important key discovery and fact to bring up, especially because there is a lot of confusion around what is right and what is not right. So I'd love to bring in Dr. Louise de Waal, who can maybe tell us a little bit about how the report confirms your experience with illegal elements within the commercial captive lion industry in South Africa.
Thanks to everybody's tuning in. As Neil is saying, it's the fact that there are illegal elements within this legal industry is not a new thing. And I think that in terms especially of the lion bones, they have been intercepted, consignments have been intercepted regularly by SAPS, the Hawks, or Border Control at OR Tambo. It was only a few weeks ago when that suitcase with, I believe, 5 skeletons was intercepted at OR Tambo. Somebody who was blatantly trying to get out of the country, literally with a suitcase full of lion bones. So it really is no surprise that this fresh evidence has come to the front again, and how widely spread these practices are and how incredibly well organized they are as well.
Yeah, to know that this is, a recent thing that happened at the airport is so shocking. And I'd love if you could also now tell us about, from the learnings that you've gotten from the report, can you maybe tell us a bit more about what are commercial captive lion breeding facilities, also known as lion farming?
Right. So South Africa has been involved in the commercial breeding and keeping of lions and other big cats for many years now, really for the past 30 years, more or less. Lions is kind of the main species that is being kept by these facilities and bred purely for financial gain. But there's quite a number of other cats as well that are part of this industry, including other indigenous species like leopard, cheetah, caracal, serval, and even little black-footed cats, those kind of smaller cats as well. And then the non-indigenous or exotic species like tiger, jaguar, pumas, clouded leopards, really, you name it, they're being bred and kept for commercial reasons. So really these farms, because they are farming wild animals and exploit them really at every stage of their lives. And when we're looking at this industry, we see that there is a variety of different sectors involved as well. So you've got the people that breed and keep these lions. Then we've got tourism facilities that are involved. We've got hunting operations. We've got taxidermists, we've got slaughterhouses, and all those different sectors are sort of interlinked with each other. They supply lions, they take lions for specific reasons. So it is quite an integrated, complex industry that goes beyond just the farms that breed and keep these animals.
You've mentioned some examples of things that take place at the lion farms. Are there other types of activities that take place there, and how are they linked to the illegal international lion trade?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as I was sort of alluding earlier, so there's so many different aspects to this industry. It sort of starts very early on when lion cubs are born. They are removed from their mothers, they're hand reared, often involving paying international volunteers. They're being used for cub petting and taking of selfies. A bit later on, when they're slightly bigger, for walking with lion activities. Then there is a phase within their life where they go back to holding facilities, and then mature lions are offered in what we call canned or captive hunts. And that is where captive bred lions are actually hunted by sports hunters for their trophies in a small fenced area, an area where they cannot escape from. So what professional hunters would sort of refer to as fair chase. The hunter generally takes the skull and the skin and maybe the claws, and the rest of the skeleton was exported for a very long time. It really started in 2008, where those skeletons as a byproduct from the hunting industry would be exported by South Africa to Southeast Asia for the traditional medicine industry. This became a real big thing, that it wasn't just byproduct anymore from the canned hunting industry, but lions were actually bred specifically for that purpose. Then in 2019, a High Court judge ruled that if South Africa wanted to set a CITES export quota, they should have taken the welfare of those animals into consideration. And he actually referred to the existing bone quota at the time as unconstitutional. It is from 2019 onwards that the minister has not been able to set a new CITES export lion bone quota. So in effect, the lion bone quota has been zero since 2019, which means that any skeletons that have gone out since 2019, and that includes bones, teeth, claws, and other body parts, they've gone out illegally.
So much for that detailed explanation. I'd love to bring back Dr. Neil de Cruz. Referring back to the report, how did you actually go about obtaining the new evidence?
Really rich and detailed background to what these types of farms are and the kinds of activities that take place on them, and also the legal situation, how you had that kind of turning off of the tap from an international perspective with lion bone exports becoming illegal. I think what we have found from our research, in addition to that, which is really important to understand, is that you really have two sides or faces towards this industry. You have those facilities which are publicly accessible. You can turn up with your family, you can make a booking, you can go inside, you can have photos with the lions, you can see them, you can interact with them in some situations. It's all a public facing tourist activity. However, in addition, you have these other farms that are located in remote places, off the grid, not open to the public at all, closed access. And in our report, we had new fresh evidence coming from people that had access to these types of secret farms where your average member of the public can't gain access. And what this information they've provided, inside information provides, is a it really paints a picture of a legal operation plugged into an illegal, illicit network. The evidence they provided not only showed unimaginable suffering, but also how the legal and illegal activity are intertwined, and really important insights in that regard.
And what evidence of cruelty did they provide?
So I'm sure Louise can attest further to this. There's long-standing concerns about welfare issues and cruelty on lion farms. Everything from overcrowding to inappropriate diets, obvious signs of psychological distress in the animals, repetitive behaviours, injuries, disease, but also just not having the proper enrichment on shelter that give them a decent quality of life. But I think that's on kind of public, and sometimes the cruelty is there and apparent, but for a tourist who is just there, overwhelmed by the idea of seeing or being close proximity to lions, they don't necessarily always understand or see the cruelty that's there, either in front of their eyes or behind the scenes. But I think once you start talking about these off-grid secret facilities, we're really talking about taking things to a whole another level of concern. I mean, we were, even as experienced researchers working on this issue, really disturbed about some of the things that we saw and heard.
It's such a good point that cruelty is not always evident as a tourist who's going and visiting these attractions. So Dr. Louise, I'd love to bring you back in and ask, does the evidence of animal cruelty in this report align with animal welfare challenges in the commercial captive lion industry in South Africa that Blood Lions has raised, and what gets reported in the media? This question is for Dr. Louise de Waal.
I think that was the wrong one being faced in. No, absolutely, Fari. It just confirms all the things that we have seen for a long time, and what also has been reported in the media. Sometimes you get the absolute most shocking evidence of animal cruelty. It isn't that long ago that we once again saw hugely, highly emaciated lions on a farm. Not so long ago, we had a farmer who had a fire go through where the lions were left with really quite severe injuries from the fire without any further treatments. And as Neil was saying as well, it's the things that we are sometimes faced with can shock you, even though you think you've seen it all. So yes, I personally have been involved in a couple of cases where we did have whistleblowers that got in touch with our organization, and we were sort of between negotiating with the NSPCA, and the stories and the images and the videos that sometimes come out of these places horrendous. And it's also, it's not just the sort of evidence that comes out in this way, but also in a more organized way. So the MSPCA, the Wildlife Unit, does inspections all through the year. And for example, in last year, 2022, they did 127 inspections of captive lion facilities in particular. They issued 49 warnings, and that means that there were warnings of non-compliance with the Animals Protection Acts. They prepared 8 dockets of severe cases that they believed were severe enough to take to court, because normally they issue warnings and notices, and it all sort of goes along the lines of that they hope to improve the situation. And there were 17 accused of animal cruelty. So it's not just the sort of things that we as animal welfare organizations will experience, but it is also confirmed by our, national organization that has the mandate to enforce the Animals Protection Acts.
I'm seeing the questions coming in, and just to note that we are going to answer those questions towards the end. So if you do have questions, you can continue to send them through. Dr. Neil de Cruz, if I could ask you, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about what evidence of illegal activity these anonymous sources have provided?
Yes, of course. I mean, just add to what Louise was saying. I mean, in terms of cruelty, there's real concerns that lions are being kind of deliberately starved in the off season of where canned hunting isn't taking place, almost like as a cost-saving exercise. And that's of course a huge welfare and ethical concern. But in terms of legality, even at a provincial level, we were provided information on things like lions being hunted in enclosures that were too small. So the lion never has a chance of escape with a canned hunt. But if the enclosures are too small, that is against regulations. Also about how lions were illegally being sedated and drugged and shot while still groggy, which again is against provincial regulations. And in addition, how veterinarians were providing sedation drugs to some facility owners to help them move lions illegitimately between facilities. So there's that kind of level that we're talking about here in terms of illegal concerns, but also beyond that, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of the international perspective, lions skeletons put out on concrete areas to dry in the sun so that they can be picked up by a bone buyer from Asia, put in a suitcase and illegally exported. So you've got legal concerns all the way from provincial to national to international level with this industry and these off-grid facilities.
Do you want to add on the evidence of international organized crime involvement? I know you've touched on it now.
Yeah, sure. Again, if you start at the level of the facilities, there's a real immune system that's set up. Lots of these facilities will be talking to each other, as Louise highlighted earlier. They're linked, and if there's any chance of inspections or people coming to check and see what's happening, there are closed message groups, there are security cameras, there are their own patrols. And if they get a whiff of anybody coming to look, nobody answers the phone, nobody answers the door, the back door is opened, and any evidence of illegal activity is quickly shipped out and no longer on the premises. So you're looking at an organized criminal element from that perspective. And then to move these bones internationally, increasingly there's concerns about organized crime syndicates, particularly with Laos being a key destination for the bones, links with illegal rhino trade as well. And here again, you're looking at typical kind of modus operandi. You're looking at shell companies created to hide their involvement. So when you start looking at this kind of organized criminal element, it's really difficult to understand or see how anything other than a very clear mandatory end to this practice is going to be effective. These aren't people that are going to kind of voluntarily want to exit away from this type of illegal activity and the profits involved.
Keeping on the topic around legal versus illegal, Louise, earlier you mentioned the legal commercial captive lion industry. What elements in this report are of concern to you? And can you tell us a little bit more about what lion parts are used for?
Yeah, so maybe start with the latter part of your question. So really every part of the skeleton virtually is used. The bones are used to substitute and replace what the tiger bones were originally used for. They are used in fortified wines for a variety of illnesses. There's no scientific proven evidence that these of the efficacy of those potions either. The teeth and the claws, let's not forget those. They're very small parts, but they are quite valuable because they're often made into expensive jewelry. So they are sort of the more expensive parts that are used. And then, of course, the skins are also highly valuable in terms of the use for rugs and the use in sort of making furniture and other luxury items. So there's a lot of use for different parts of the lion and the skeleton as well. I think what is so incredibly concerning with parts of what we have sort of learned again from this report, and it's what Neil already sort of alluded on as well, is that this industry is so highly organized that they are the amount of enforcement that we have, they're able to miss somehow. So also I know from the NSPCA, they very often need to get warrants to get onto their property. So they have to go to the magistrates first to get a warrant to get onto the property and to actually carry out their mandates and do a welfare inspection. And also that these some of these facilities that are part of a legal industry, but they are getting away with the illegal practices as well. And I think because they are quite remote and there's a lot of farm gates, that inspectors, but also the provincial departments and the EMIs who should go, or they do go out for certain inspections on these farms, can also not turn up unannounced. So everything has to happen in an announced fashion, and then they can make sure that the practices, the more illicit practices, and the practices that might not be quite so legal or proper, that they can actually make sure that they're not out in the open at the time that inspectors come through. And that is incredibly concerning when we are talking about an industry that is legally allowed in this country, except for the export of the lion bones, but all the other areas of the industry are still legal.
Thank you so much for bringing in that clarity. And Dr. Neil de Cruz, I want to bring you back in also now to ask, from what I hear about these anonymous sources, it seems like the cruelty does not only pertain to the lions. How are employees at these types of off-grid facilities treated?
Definitely. Louise had mentioned earlier, it's not just lions in terms of species. There are other big cats on these facilities that are suffering, but it's also the people that are being exploited too. There's a long-standing series of concerns about people that work in this type of environment, in terms of low pay, benefits, and job security. But also you've got to remember they're dealing with large carnivores, predators. So the risk to them in terms of their own health and safety from attacks needs to be taken into account, but also, you know, the from what we've seen and heard, the lack of evidence about anything properly in place in terms of protective gear and safeguards during the slaughter, and the human and public health concerns that are associated with that. So there's a whole series of concerns there. But in addition to that, you know, when you are looking about this kind of criminal element, there's also the reality that, you know, they and their families are at potential risk of physical harm and intimidation if they look to speak out about cruelty or illegal practices that are taking place. So, you know, when you look at that and then you extend it up into the potential harm that this could have on South Africa's reputation as a tourism destination and as a conservation leader, you've got this multiple level of concerns across species and people, and negative impacts that are of real civic concern.
And now, like, with this impact on employees, with the cruelty we're learning about on animals and the illegal activities that continue to go on, Louise, can you share with us what needs to be done to stop the cruelty to animals and the exploitation of humans?
Yeah, I think what really needs to be done is, as Neil was just saying as well, is that a mandatory time-bound phase out of the industry to actually permanently close these facilities. And to just give you a little bit of background, maybe, so in May 2021, after a high-level panel deliberation and recommendations, the Minister Creasy of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment announced that South Africa would no longer breed keep lions for commercial purposes. That was in May 2021. In the meantime, we've had a new white paper coming out on sustainable utilization and the conservation of biological resources. We're now going through a phase of voluntary exits for candidates in the captive lion breeding industry. But it's really, that is not enough. And we're really, really hoping that the voluntary exit is only a first step towards prohibition of this industry. And that is also where our latest campaign, together with Treeshake and World Animal Protection, comes into the Pride Not Cruelty campaign, where we actually call on the public in terms of asking people to share any form of lion art, to show support to the minister, to say, you know, please, we're supporting you in what you've started in May 2021. Do not stop at the voluntary exit, but make sure that we are going through to a prohibition phase as well. And prohibition phase, it's, as we've been talking here, it's a very complex industry, an industry that has been operating legally for many, many years. So we cannot close that overnight. It has to be done responsibly for the people involved, responsibly for the animals involved as well. And that is going to take time. You know, we're probably talking about possibly something like a 5-year period at least to close this industry down. But what we're really urging and calling on the public to show your support to the minister, because we're on the right path. Don't stop here. Don't stop at voluntary, but carry on and make this a mandatory and a prohibition to actually phase out this industry for good. So all the damaging elements that this industry can potentially cause in terms of our South Africa's reputation as a leader in conservation, and also from a tourism perspective.
Super clear. So not voluntary, but mandatory phase out of the commercial captive lion industry. And I love that you touched on the Pride Not Cruelty hashtag, where everyone can go on there and see who has already added their voice to this campaign, and you too can do the same. Dr. Louise, I want to just pass through a question that's come through from one of the listeners. And the question is the demand or supply a problem here? What has been happening in the global markets? have countries outside of South Africa implemented laws to help the imports into those countries?
I think demand is always an issue. I think in terms of lion bones, I think we certainly have actually created demand, because there was never a demand for lion bones. It was always a demand for tiger bones. So that is a demand that we have created as a country, because we had these bones that came as a sort of a byproduct of the hunting industry. So I think demand is always an issue. There are demand reduction campaigns happening on the other side as well. And legislation can do a lot of good, and obviously also a lot of damage at the same time. But when we're looking at countries that have sort of really tried to do something what's in their within their sphere of influence, is, for example, a lot of the airlines that have said, okay, we are no longer carrying hunting trophies, for example. And there's something like 45 airlines, I think, right now, who are no longer carrying lion trophies. If people can't get their lion trophies out of the country, then it becomes less interesting to sort of come and kill these animals in South Africa or elsewhere. Also, there are quite a few countries that have put a ban on the importation of lion trophies, and in particular the captive lion trophies. So one of the first ones was United States, and most of the lion trophies used to go, the captive bred lion trophies went to the United States. They've put in much stricter regulations in terms of the importations of those kind of trophies. A fair number of European countries as well. One of the latest ones was Finland, that have actually put a ban in place on the importation of lion trophies. So I think legislation can do a lot of good as well. So yeah, it's never a very simple and black and white solution, and that's why it needs to be approached from different fronts. So we need to do our bit in South Africa, and other people need to do their part on the sort of the international side in terms of implementing new legislation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Neil, I'd like to get your perspective as well. Do you think that stricter laws in other countries would help, since exporting is happening?
Yeah, I think, with any law, when you're looking to apply it from provincial, national to international level, everyone has to be in lockstep. There can't be any loopholes or ways to bypass the efforts and good intentions of laws at certain parts of the trade chain. But of course, laws not only have to be in place and in lockstep, but they also have to have the political will behind them. They have to be enforced. You have to have the resources and the expertise to act on them. And in addition, what I'd also add, which I think is very important, is in terms of consumer demand. As Louise had mentioned, lion bones aren't actually formally recognized in traditional Asian medicine. They have come about because of their ability to act as a substitute for tiger bones. But when you look at the demand and how we can look to shift things there, there are huge, vast amounts and components of traditional Asian medicine which is herbal and which has been in use for centuries. So how can we work with consumers, their practitioners that prescribe these medicines? How can we get them to focus on the herbal elements and not, as Louisa said, get to a situation where we're creating a new demand with a new species in a different country? So I think laws, consumer demand, and a commitment to the phase out need to happen across all of these different elements for it to be successful.
Thank you. And in closing, one last question from one of the listeners is, how do we make sure that the sanctuaries and facilities that we are supporting are the real deal? Are there any resources or lists available to the public?
I think, there's certainly, if you're looking to enter a facility, when you're looking at its website and before you go in, look for those obvious tell signs. Are you being given the opportunity to have direct contact with a predator, from a cub to a sub-adult to an adult? That's something that a good, responsible, genuine sanctuary shouldn't be doing. Also, have a look around for young animals. There are wild populations in South Africa of lions are doing really well. There isn't the need to breed them in captivity for the release. So if they are being bred, there's a real concern there that might be just for interactions as a tourist. And then, also look at the conditions of the facility. Look at whether or not the animals look like they've got anywhere near sufficient space or shelter or enrichment. And also, ask questions. There's a lot of greenwashing that goes on in the industry, but really ask where those animals were sourced from, how long have they been there, why are they there? These are some of the kind of obvious aspects that you should be asking and questioning yourself before you visit what you hope is going to be a genuine sanctuary.
Thank you. That is so helpful. And finally, I would like to ask Louise, if you could please also answer the same question about how do we make sure that sanctuaries and facilities we're supporting are the real deal?
Yeah, totally. And as Neil already said, a real sanctuary is a facility that doesn't breed. So no young animals, no babies, no human animal interaction. The only interaction that should take place is in terms of veterinarian care. They do not trade, so they don't buy and they don't sell animals, and they provide their animals with a home for the rest of their lives. So those are the real issues that we need to remember. A real sanctuary, no breeding, no trading, no interaction, and a home for life. So as Neil is saying, there's so many red flags that we can, if you really know what to look for, you immediately can see, interaction, red flag, baby animals, red flag, they're breeding. And I think in South Africa, what is really amazing is that our tourism association, SATSA, they actually developed some guidelines for captive wildlife facilities that are open for tourism in South Africa, and those guidelines are really useful for people, for any kind of, not just lions, not just any other carnivore, but any captive wildlife. And an NGO called wildchoices.org, they have actually applied those guidelines and the tool and assessed every facility with captive wildlife in South Africa. And the outcome falls into 3 categories. It's either a support with caution, or an avoid. And the sad thing is that the vast majority of our captive wildlife facilities in South Africa actually fall into that avoid category. So if you really aren't sure and you want to be certain and you want to make sure you're not supporting the wrong places, then visit their website and have a look. It's based on really solidly developed guidelines, and a very, very useful tool. And I think also one of the things that Neil just mentioned, I think what is so important to realize is that we do not need to breed lions in captivity to actually stop them from extinction in the wilds. Lions breed perfectly. They breed so well in both captivity and in the wilds. All we need to do in the wild is make sure they've got safe habitat, and that we eliminate the threats that exist in the wilds. The breeding element is not something that we need to worry about. So from a conservation perspective, there is no need at this point in time to actually breed lions in captivity. We just need to make sure they've got safe habitat, safe space to thrive. So I think that is something very important to keep in mind, because that is one of the greenwashing elements that a lot of these facilities will use.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share the knowledge and the awareness as well around this important issue. And I just want to call for everybody to please visit pridenotcruelty.co.za and also to add your voice using the hashtag. So big thank you to Dr. Neil de Cruz, as well as Dr. Louise Duval, for your time on this live stream. Thank you, everybody.